Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's great to have you back at my podcast. I'm Wanda Curley, your authority on everything project, program, and portfolio management. This is brought to you by PM Powered, a company that can bring you information on project, program, and portfolio management and help you on your needs, including setting up a PMO, which I know is a lot of companies are very interested in what's going on nowadays. In a PMO, because they finally are starting to understand that it makes sense to set up a PMO in an organization. I'm going to do a little bit differently this time on the podcast. What I'm going to do is bring up some failed projects, and these are all government projects. And I don't intend to pick on any one country. I just found ones that were interesting. So we're going to look at these and try to understand what happened. Each one does give an analysis, but I want to go a little bit deeper and see if we can find out. So the first one is called pink uniforms. And it really doesn't have anything to do with pink, but it's kind of interesting to note. So this one was done with the U.S. Department of Defense. So I'm picking on my own country, USA. The project type was military aid. The date was June 2017, so not too long ago, and it was $28 million. And it was $28 million that absolutely was a disaster. So what happened basically, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, even though it's just a couple of paragraphs, but we were contracted through military aid to come up with a military uniform, camouflage for Afghanistan. So a small company that did forest type camouflage was actually found. They found this foreign forest pattern, and it was offered by a private company. It is patented and copyright, so they had to pay an extreme amount of money for that. This was shown to the Afghan defense minister, and he loved it. He liked what he saw, and no more effort was put in to see if that made sense. Well, guess what? Only 2% of Afghanistan has forest in it. The rest of it is, as you can imagine, is not forested. So now we have all of their troops in forest gear. That doesn't make sense. What happened? So there was a USA Today newspaper reporter actually brought this to light. And he said, my concern is, what if the Minister of Defense liked purple or pink? Are we going to buy pink uniforms for soldiers and not ask questions? And he hit it on the head. I don't know if it's he or she, but the author hit it on the head. Questions were not asked. What happened to the project manager? Project manager, where were you? Why did you do this? Now, I'm not saying there weren't some political push here, but again, you as the project manager need to understand the political rationality of what's going on in your project. You need to understand through neuroscience and neuroagility that people think differently. They have political views. They are either detail thinkers, they're either coach or playmakers where they see the forest for the trees, or they're strategic. I don't think this defense minister was very strategic, in my opinion. I would even question if he was a coach or a playmaker. I think he was more detail-oriented and living to the moment, and the project manager failed. The project manager failed to say, well, sir, how many forests do you have in this country? The project manager could have gone out and done some research him or herself and found out that this was done there. Now, since this was now done for Afghanistan, again, they have a bunch of uniforms that make no sense. So if you look at my triangle called by PM Powered, it shows that you have to bring in the financials. You have to bring in the variables of the organization. So we have variables of a company that only does forest patterns and a country that has very limited forest. And we have a defense minister that's not looking at what he should be looking at and says, oh, yeah, I like that. It looks nice. So what happened here? Why didn't this project manager look at the variables on this project? And time is a constant. You can't do anything about this. So this project manager did not do anything with PQUity, another project, program, or portfolio management acuity. So where was his keenness, his or her keenness? I'm appalled that this happened and it didn't have to happen. So the isosceles triangle for the PM-powered triangle has failed. And when it fails on one or two sides, it's a collapse on itself. And guess what happened here? It failed on the variable side and it failed on the financial side. So this project was a complete disaster and a complete failure. Sometimes you have projects that fail in one or one area, and I wouldn't call them a complete disaster, but they are a disaster. Okay, let's go on to a different one here. So we have another one. It's called International Donor Agencies, Africa. And here, this is where they were digging boreholes and wells, and it was done in July 2016 at a cost of $360 million. And again, it was a disaster, and I'll get into why it was a disaster. But this was done by the UN, the United Nations. The Sustainable Development Goals is to increase access to clean water and sanitation facilities. And it's done in many rural areas such as sub-Saharan Africa, and this is where this was done. And it's not uncommon in sub-Saharan Africa and many other countries that you have to walk miles for clean water. So $360 million was spent, and it was US dollars, have been spent on building boreholes and wells that quickly became inoperable. And so what does this do for the morale of the people in the sub-Saharan Africa? They thought they were now going to have clean water. They thought they were going to have pumps that worked. Well, they were so difficult, the pumps, to use that the people didn't understand how to use them. There was no support left behind. The stuff corroded quickly and things broke, and there were no spare parts left behind. Well, what do you think is going to happen? So reasons cited for the 50,000 non-functioning water are, amongst others, and so this is what they said: poor construction. That's sad. That shouldn't have happened. Where was quality control? Quality control drives the results of your project. Lack of expertise and experience and poor supervision. So they used people from the area to build these boreholes and wells, hoping that they would provide then the needed training to the others. But what happened was these people were just told what to do, and they weren't taught what to do. They weren't told how to fix things. They weren't shown how to do it on their own. They were just accepting of what the people told them, the supervisors. Failure caused by well users and poor technology choice. So the failure was because the people didn't understand the well or how to use it. They broke, and the technology was appalling to use in sub-Sahara. So people tend to make assumptions about why water sources fail and blame a lack of spare parts, financing, maintenance problems, or climate change, for example, but often the cause is not clear. I think this cause is clear. There were many things that happened on this one. And so the UN did their own analysis on this, and they said it was operational dysfunction, lack of support to ensure long-term sustainability, so there was a focal imbalance failures, insufficient capacity building at the local level, failure to ensure availability of sufficient resources, lack of project management training, and support. Well, maybe there was lack of project management training, but then again, I blame the UN for not hiring a good project manager. I know the UN has wonderful project managers. I've worked with the UN in the past, and they have extremely skilled project managers. What happened on this one? UN leadership, where are you going with this? Are you just taking the money willy-nilly and throwing it down and saying, oh, look, we did another thing for the sub-Saharan, without actually doing the research that you need? You've got to understand your people. You've got to understand the culture. You've got to understand what they're going through. You've got to understand the climate. You've got to understand that people in the sub-Saharan are different than people in a different area. And I know you know that, so what happened here? You didn't use neuroscience. You didn't take in about the neuroagility of the people. The people there are trying to survive, and you didn't allow them to survive. You didn't provide them the training, the expectations. So if we look at the triangle of time, variables, and finance, again, the finance was a horrible miscalculation because they didn't put spare parts in there and they didn't put training in there. So they miscalculated on that. They also miscalculated on the type of hardware to put in there. It was so difficult to use that it broke or it didn't meet the climates that was needed for the sub-Saharan era. So variables. I talked about several of the variables. There was culture, there was hardware, there was project management. So lack of project management was taught to when they left, when the project manager left. Project manager that was in charge of this, where were you on all of this? Did you talk to the people? Did you understand their needs? So again, the two sides of the triangle collapsed upon themselves, and now you don't have results. Where was the quality control on this to drive the results of the organization? Where was your power project manager to push and prod and say, this is not right, we need to go back to the drawing board? So again, lack of project management and lack of leadership. Let's go on to the next one. It's called the Jacques Cartier Champlain Bridge Corporation. So this one is in Canada. And I just almost chuckled with this one, but it was an absolute disaster. And I can't help to feel for these people in Canada. So it was a highway overpass construction. So it wasn't done in a third world country. This was a developed country. It was done in October of 2016, so a couple of years ago. And it was at a cost of $11 million Canadian. So if we look at it, I am a taxpayer, just like everybody that's listening to this. I'm sure you pay some kinds of taxes. This was done with Canadian taxpayer dollars, and you expect the government to respect your taxpayer dollars because they're hard-earned dollars. And again, this didn't happen. In the city of Montreal, they recently had to demolish an overpass that was only built in the previous year. So the overpass was built in 2015. And it was demolished the following year, October. Why? It was having built the new overpass, officials found that the positioning, can you get this? The positioning of the overpass is not in accordance with a redesign of the road access to the nearby Champlain Bridge that is also under redevelopment. Can you believe that? Engineers, where were you? Civil engineers, where were you? Were you asking the questions that needed to be asked? Were you going into the political realm of the government there? Did you look at what was going on around you? Did you look at the environment? Did you look what you needed to do? Now, Canadian officials in Montreal said that the current bridge that was up there, the infrastructure was so poor that it had to be brought down. However, there wasn't any analysis done to see if they could have just repaired the bridge temporarily until the overpass could have been done in a more robust way, so to show that it meets the needs of the overall Champlain Bridge project. Champlain Bridge project. So as I mentioned before, it says here, note, to be fair, it is worth noting the government representatives claim that the original overpass was dangerous and hence needed to be replaced immediately. There was no studies done to see if it could have just been patched up to last maybe another year while the whole road was being looked at. So what were some of the contributing factors that an analysis and case study was done on here was failure to coordinate across multiple projects. So this was a program manager, where were you? Lack of long-term planning. They didn't look at the big picture. They just looked in their microcosm. Again, failure on the project manager's part, failure on the program part. Failure to utilize program management. Yes, hooray, they found it. And lack of internal communication. Project manager, where were you? Where is your power? You are the power of a project. Ask the hard questions. That's what you're getting paid for. So let's go to the next one. This next one is called Phoenix Failing. And it's again in Canada. And this one I really resonated with because I had a problem with the United States government when I was in the military to be paid when I was a reservist. The system was so miserably put in that they weren't paying people. So anyway, this one is about the Department of Public Works and Government Services in Canada. The project type was new payroll system. The project name was Phoenix, and I find that very ironic, and I'll share that with you in a minute. The date was July 2016, so not too far ago, and it was $50 million project. So the synopsis is, a phoenix is supposed to rise from the flames. Instead of rising, Canada's new federal government payroll system called Phoenix seems to be stuck firmly in the flames. According to reports from Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, since the deployment of the new payroll system started in February of 2016, a good percentage of public servants have been paid incorrectly. Some have received too little, some have received too much, and some have not been paid at all. Can you imagine a government employee who, they're normally not very rich people, they have been paid not at all for a full 5 months. Can you imagine somebody not being paid for a full 5 months? Some people have borrowed, they dipped into their retirement, or they simply are not paying their bills. Can you believe that? The breadth of the problem has endured for 5 months, so when it was put in, the Prime Minister has had to come out and force the issue because it's not being addressed. So what happened? Well, there's as many as 7,000 calls per day. It was sized for 2,200 calls per day, so the help desk is quickly overwhelmed. They can't do their work. They're answering calls all the time, so they can't do anything. It reached a staggering 82,000 complaints and issues going on. Analysis of the problems by government staff and IBM. IBM, you should be ashamed of yourself. The IT system provider found that the cost to address the ousting issues could be as high as $50 million. So there were people that have just can't pay their bills. Can you believe that? And they're wanting to be paid. So Phoenix falling, public servants who can't get paid, how the Phoenix pay system rose and fell. Liberals agreed to emergency meeting Thursday over Phoenix payroll mess. Cost to fix it is going to jump another $25 million, but IBM is saying $50 million. Government of Canada provides an update on Phoenix, the federal public service new system. It's still not fixed, folks. Can you believe this? So if you look at the model provided by PM Powered, it's what has failed here. Well, if you just look at the triangle, one is the variables. It's always going to be variables, folks, that get you, and the financials. Now, payroll taxes are going to have to be paid to fix something that should not have to have been fixed in the first place. If they had been testing it like they should be, doing quality control to provide the results, then you would have been able to do this. Project manager, where were you? What were you doing? IBM, I know you have great project managers. What happened? There's political rationality. I know working with the government is not easy, but it happens. You have got to be able to understand their political rationality. You've also got to understand the people that you're working with. Are they people that are down in the weeds? So work with those people and understand them. Understand how you deal with them. Understand how to deal with people that see the forest for the trees, and also understand how you deal with people that are strategic thinkers. Remember, strategic thinkers sometimes have to be pulled down into the weeds so that they understand what's going on. And where was your keenness, project manager? Where was your P acuity, your project, program, and portfolio management acuity, your keenness? You should be ashamed of yourself, P acuity. So that your P acuity failed on this one. You weren't asking the right questions. You weren't driving it. So I'm going to say that this project manager lacked the power that he or she should have had. I'm going to try to be safe on that one. I don't want to be too castigating on this. So what's the next one? I have the last two I'm going to talk about today are airport projects. And this one is absolutely not hilarious because I'm glad they found the disaster. But anyway, this one is called A Catalog of Catastrophe. This happened in the UK. It was UK funding. I shouldn't say it happened in the UK. The organization was the Department for International Development, so DFID, UK. It's sort of like our USAID. It was a new airport. It was June 2016, again, not too long ago. And it was 285 million sterling pounds. Not a small project. So what happened here? So in St. Helens, I think it's St. Helens. Let me find it here. Yeah, St. Helena, I'm sorry, which is 2,000 kilometers out in the Atlantic Ocean. So it's out in the middle of the ocean. It's basically a volcano that's brought up, and it has an island around it. So one of the things that is absolutely terrifying to pilots is wind shear. Wind shear causes planes to, wind shear is when there's a rapid change in wind speed or direction over a very short distance. It's especially dangerous when it happens near the ground, because that's the time when the pilots really don't have all that much control over the plane. So takeoffs and landings are can be very dangerous, especially if there's wind shear. There's violent turbulence usually with wind shear, and you'll lose lift. When an airplane loses lift, then you can have catastrophic results. So there were studies done, and it was told that there were wind shear problems in this area because it's mountainous, it's out in the ocean, things are changing all the time. So it goes on to say that the conditions can be caused by a number of triggers, and they're all well known. Mountains, as I mentioned, and this was a mountain terrain. Flying near mountains, of course, can do it, and it requires special care, training, and attention. So like I said, this is very well known, and hence a proposal to build a new airport on the island of St. Helena was greeted with warnings about the danger. But still, it was decided to go on, and it was built, and they had a test pilot come out with a 737, which is not a small aircraft. It's a big commercial type aircraft. And it was a catastrophic. I mean, nobody was hurt. The plane did land, but the airport was closed, and it still sits abandoned because it is just too dangerous to bring in. If you watch the video of this plane landing, it shows that it's pitching and tilting near the ground as the turbulence buffeted the aircraft. I know if I were on that aircraft, and I do have a private pilot's license, I would be absolutely inconsolable at that point because I know what's going on. So it's now been indefinitely postponed. They haven't figured out an option to come over it, and there weren't any options given in this area. So what happened here? Failure to listen to the advice of the experts. SMEs told them not to do it. Subject matter expert says don't do it. Failure to assess or address the risks. So project manager, where was your risk management? Did you listen to your experts? You should be doing that. Those are the people that are down in the weeds. You've got to listen to them. Did you look at the forest for the trees? Did you look at the terrain around there? Or were you just so focused on building this building that you didn't take in your environmental factors? Variables, they got you again. Mountainous terrain, out in the middle of the ocean. And now we have an abandoned building on St. Helena. Hopefully they can use it for something else other than flying. Let's go to the next one. This is about the Berlin-Brandenburg Airport. Many of you may have heard about it. This actually is not an analysis. It comes from the CIO magazine, and it says, Notorious Project Failures, Berlin Airport. Why did it go wrong? So as we know, projects are going on everywhere. You and I do projects. There's projects going on in companies over all the time. So what happened at the Berlin-Brandenburg Airport? This is one of the most surprising project failures. And I'm very surprised because Germany is very well known for their project management and being deep into the details on how to get things done. It is rare to see a project of such size fail, especially in Germany, a country known for its effectiveness, efficiency, and planning capabilities. Now, I don't know that I would say that such a size failure is not known. Look at the Denver, Colorado's new airport. It finally opened, but it was a disaster in opening. So let's go on about this one. One of the main goals of this project was the Berlin-Brandenburg Airport to become the busiest airport in Germany with a projected 45 million passengers annually. The airport's feasibility and pre-planning took 15 years. Construction started in 2006, and the airport was supposed to take 5 years to build. The target opening date was 2011. Today, 6 years later, well, actually now it's 8 years later, of the original planned launch date, the Berlin airport has yet to open. The latest estimate of total project cost is 7.9 billion. That's billion euros, almost 15%, 50% above the approved budget of 5.4 billion euros. Using a simple framework he developed, this author that wrote this, he went into different things. Stakeholders, there were too many and with different interests. You can't bring everything to everybody. We learned this as children. We learned this as project managers. You've got to manage your stakeholders. You got to manage the political rationality of what's going on. This was not done if the stakeholders weren't managed. The state of Brandenburg, the German federal government, the city mayor, the airlines, the passengers, the workers, the Berlin citizens, and 2 other Berlin airports were all stakeholders. What were they thinking? What was going on here? Of course it's doomed to failure unless you had a very, very, very strong program manager, because an airport is a program. Where were you, program manager? The project manager shouldn't have to be doing it because they don't have the total political reality. Variables, other things they've got them. Communication, important to report the real status. According to extensive research, communication is the most important task when the project is being executed. Yeah, I'll agree that it's one of the most important tasks. I wouldn't say it is the most important task. Communication also means sharing the right information and the correct status of the project. Hallelujah. The city's mayor, Klaus Wowereit, who acted as project sponsor. Why would a city mayor be the project sponsor? You want somebody much higher and with more clout than that. Project sponsor and chairman of the supervisory board has been accused of pretending that there were no problems during construction. Even as it grew, he still denied that there were any problems. So maybe the project manager was reporting, but was told, keep your mouth shut, we're going to go on. The more they kept on adding scope. So the more the scope changes, the more challenging it is to deliver. They had design scope changes, requirements changes, functionality changes, feature characteristics change. And we all know about scope creep, but even when you do it through change management, there's still scope creep. And that's why it becomes so important to stop. Project manager, it's your responsibility. You have the power to say stop. Or, if they won't listen to you, then you have other options as well, but I won't go into that today. Quality checks. There should have been quality checks throughout the thing. So quality checks are planned throughout a project to test and ensure the final outcome. Yeah, obviously, quality checks help you drive your results. So the Berlin-Brandenburg Airport project encountered significant quality issues. Reports indicate that there were 66,500 defects were found, 34,000 are described as significant, and 5,845 were critical. Critical defects include non-functional fire protection. Can you imagine that at an airport? An alarm system that was not built in accordance with appropriate building codes. Oh, come on, folks. How can you build an alarm system without the correct building codes? Wrongly placed smoke extractors, conducts without isolation. I think they mean conduits. And walls built to the wrong fire rating. In an airport, in a place where they have terrorist attacks. Come on, folks. Where were you? Where were you not pounding on the desks of the project sponsor and the project stakeholders? You could have stopped this. Where were you, program manager? You could have stopped this too. The variables absolutely failed on this. The quality control absolutely failed. So the quality control came down crashing in the triangle. Let me back up. The variables came down crashing on this. So did the financials. And when you have 2 sides of a triangle going and the quality control is contained in the middle and the power of the project manager is contained in the middle of this triangle, guess what happens? Your power goes away and quality control goes away. You cannot have a successful project. I'm just absolutely appalled. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. I've done it slightly different. and I hope to do some more analysis on failed projects because they're all over the world to see what they are driving to. We noticed that most of our projects today were failures due to lack of communication and not understanding the variables on your project. This was brought to you by PM Powered. I'm Wanda Curley, your authority on project, program, and portfolio management. Please go to pmcurrent.com and follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. I would love to hear from you. If you were a project manager on all of this and you would like to bring me up to speed or like to correct me on what really happened, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to have a good discussion going back and forth on what could have been done differently. What did you do to try to make it differently? Please contact me at wanda@pmpower.com. I'd love to have you on this podcast. Stay tuned. I hope you enjoyed this different podcast, and I'll talk to you next week.